The VW ID3 has just had some emergency updates, but why did it need them, what's new, and what's it like? In this review, we're finding out. But before we start, this video is supported by PodPoint, winner of our Best Home EV Charger Test 2023. Look in our description below to find out more. So when the ID3 first hit the roads over here in 2020, it was very good because of its range, its practicality, and its ride comfort. But it wasn't perfect, and that is quite a kind way to describe the absolutely diabolical infotainment system issues that the ID3 first had when it was launched. It was laggy, it was glitchy, and the rest of the tech in the interior was really just a confused and muddled mess that was very difficult to interact with. And on top of that, the interior quality generally was pretty disappointing compared to VW's usually high standards. On top of that, owners were reporting problems with the car's range calculations, and there were charging issues with it as well. And this was so significant that apparently it was rumoured to have been the reason that Herbert Diess stepped down as Volkswagen CEO last year. But VW has heard all these complaints and it's attempted to do something about it with this updated model. These changes weren't actually scheduled to happen as early as this, but given all the problems, VW actually rushed this through and brought it to market earlier than planned. And even though this is just a facelift really, VW's already referring to this as the second generation ID3. So what actually is new? Well, we'll start on the outside first, and the previous ID3 had this kind of black panel on the bonnet here beneath the windscreen. You can see that's been changed for this slightly longer, sleeker design. There's also a redesigned bumper, and you've got these vertical air intakes here as well. And apparently this does have a slight aerodynamic advantage over the previous car. The tail light designs are all new, and there's refreshed scrolling indicators, if you've ticked them on the options list. There's also a new colour to pick as well. But the bigger news is inside the ID3, where there is now some better materials than before. So the most noticeable thing to point out is here on the door, where you've still got this technically soft touch material, which actually still feels quite hard and cheap. But this bit here has been made bigger and it's nice and soft, feels quite luxurious, and you've got a bigger armrest here as well, which is nice. On the dashboard as well, you've got some slightly better materials than before to again try and lift things compared to the previous model. You've now also, not that this changes anything, but got the ID3 badge between the air vents here. You didn't have that on the previous car. But it is still the case that there are lots of cheap feeling and cheap looking plastics in this interior. So you've still got this big slab of plastic for the center console down here and on the lower part of the dashboard. So when you consider that you can spend more than £40,000 on this car, it still remains the case that the interior really is pretty disappointing from a quality perspective. But quality is one thing. The standout criticism of the ID3 when it first launched was the infotainment system. But VW has moved to try and address that with this facelift, in part at least. So, the infotainment system that you get on this car now runs the latest software available to VW, which is 3.5, and it's what you'll find in the latest ID Buzz as well. It is without a doubt significantly better than what the car first launched with, but it's still not perfect. The reason it's better is because it's just far smoother and more responsive than it was initially. So there can still be a hesitation jumping between menus. This is definitely not perfect and there's room for improvement, but it is a huge leap forwards from what this car first came with. By the standards of other infotainment systems in other cars though, it's still not particularly brilliant. You do at least get wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Something else new with this ID3 is the fact that the head-up display can now use VW's augmented reality technology, which is something we first saw with the ID4 and the ID5, and essentially shows some graphics on the head-up display that highlights things such as how far away the car in front of you is and where the lines are on the road. But to be honest, it feels a bit more like a gimmick than something that's actually useful. Another frustrating thing that could have changed but hasn't are these touch sensitive buttons on the steering wheel here. They are so frustrating to use because when you're driving, it's very difficult to know if you've pressed them or if you haven't pressed them, or maybe you've accidentally pressed them, and they're just very distracting to use while you're driving. So it's a real shame that VW hasn't moved to change that, especially because some of their newer models, like the upcoming Passat and the Tiguan, are going back to using physical buttons on their steering wheel. So it's a shame that the ID3 hasn't changed that. Something else new though, and something that is better than before, are these seats. They feel very nicely cushioned, quite sporty in how they look. They do hug you better than the previous car, and it generally is comfortable in these seats up front. But now is the time to point out that there will actually be a facelift of this facelift partway through next year. So VW is so keen to bring these changes to market that it's having to do so in a kind of staggered manner because it can't change everything all at once. So partway through 2024, we're going to have some more updates to this. For example, this touchscreen infotainment system will come on a bigger 12-inch screen, and it will also have backlit climate controls, which again was a big criticism of the ID3 and remains for this car, because on a bright day like this, you can see that yes, that's cold and that's hot, but when it's dark, these aren't lit at all, so you haven't got a clue what's going on down here. That will change with the car partway through 2024. But if you buy an ID3 right now, then this is the setup that you get, and this is what it will look like. Now, lots of things with the new ID3 are the same as the old model, like the size of the car. So because there haven't been any dimension changes, in terms of practicality, the new model is exactly the same as the old one, which means adults sat in the back actually don't have a great deal of spare headroom sat back here. Legroom is a bit more generous, and you've got a nice flat floor back here as well. But it's definitely not the most practical electric car in terms of rear seat space, but it's also definitely not the worst either. One thing to bear in mind with the ID3 though, we're going to talk more about the battery options in a minute, but if you go for the biggest battery, which is Pro S trim, then you only have 4 seats in your ID3, not 5 like you get with the smaller battery. And apparently the justification for that is the bigger battery is heavier than the smaller battery, and apparently having that and 3 passengers sat in the back here would overload the rear axle. So you're only allowed 4 seats in the ID3. But surely that would just depend on who is sat in the back. Like the rear seats, the boot is the same as before, so it's fairly good. Not massive, but certainly not tiny. It's a bit bigger than the storage capacity on offer in the MG4, but the Model 3 is much bigger than the ID3. And there's no front boot either. The new ID3 retains the same rear-mounted electric motor as before, and it also has the same batteries, but the lineup has been reduced and simplified slightly. So previously you had a choice of 3 different batteries, but for the new model, the smallest 45 kilowatt hour option has been dropped, leaving you with 2 batteries. There's a 58 kilowatt hour one and a 77 kilowatt hour version. Similarly, the trim lineup has also been reduced to just 2. If you go for a Pro model, then you get the smaller battery. If you go for Pro S, you get the bigger one. Pro models get a 266 mile claimed range and can cover 0 to 62 miles an hour in 7.3 seconds, while the Pro S gets a 347 mile claimed range and a 0 to 62 miles an hour time of 7.9 seconds. Performance is the same as before, but the range is slightly better. VW has also increased the maximum charging rate. The Pro model can accept a 120 kilowatt charge, and the Pro S can now accept 170 kilowatts, which is in line with an upgrade given to the ID4. And while there are just 2 versions to choose from right now, there are apparently plans to replace the previous entry-level ID3, which had a smaller 45 kilowatt hour battery. But that hasn't been confirmed yet, and it won't be available straight away. And to drive. This is the same as before. There's been no great chassis redevelopments, no huge boost in power to what the ID3 offers, but nothing much really needed to change because this is a really nice electric car on the road. Whether you're in town, whether you're on the motorway, it's comfortable. Yes, like with all EVs, there is a slight firmness to the ride, but it's still a comfortable electric car overall. Other rivals are a bit quieter inside though. That's the only thing that might have been good to improve for this facelift. But otherwise, it's a nice electric car to do some miles in. So it's just a shame that the quality of the interior still doesn't match the quality of this car on the road. The shortcomings of the ID3 have always been made harder to accept because it's not a cheap electric car. The more expensive versions are pretty much the same money as a Tesla Model 3. You do get a decent amount of equipment as standard though. Pro models get a heated steering wheel, heated front seats and adaptive cruise control, while upgrading to Pro S gets you bigger alloys and some upgraded seat material. It's a shame that things like a reversing camera or the 2-tone interior colour scheme on the doors are only available as a part of very expensive optional packs. In fact, our test car in this review is the base model, but has more than £10,000 worth of optional extras fitted to it. So it isn't hard to send the price soaring if you've got your eye on a few options. So the VW ID3 has always been a very good, very well-rounded electric car, let down by aspects of its interior. With this new model, it's pretty much the same story. So the strengths remain, and the weaknesses, they do as well. But there have been improvements. However, remember, there have been improvements in all the other rivals in this class as well. There are some cars around now that didn't even exist when the ID3 was first launched. So it is the case that the closely related Cupra Born is still a better pick than the ID3 because it has a marginally better interior than this car. And if you like what the ID3 offers, then the MG4 can give you something very similar for a significantly cheaper price. Thanks for watching this review. If you want to see another one, then click there. And if you want to read our review of this car, and if you want to get a great deal on your next car, go to our website there.